first one, Better World, pensions. I'm not going to go down to social responsible investing. I think we've killed that. That's not an option. It's not an option. But what is a bigger and more embedded doctrine within corporations is this corporate governance, right? That really needs to be resolved. And again, the U.S. case, if you are putting forward a proposal as a shareholder, you have right now under this Security Exchange Commission Rule 14A-8, so this is a law which can be changed, but here are the restrictions, okay? Any shareholder who has continuously held shares of at least $2,000 or 1% of the company value may submit at least one proposal of 500 words or less per annual meeting. Great, but wait for it. This proposal can get thrown out if it doesn't meet four criteria. The first is if the proposal reflects a personal grievance, it's thrown out. Second, if the proposal requires the firm to violate state, federal, or international law, it gets thrown out. Third, the proposal relates to operations accounting for less than 5% of the firm's asset sales or revenue, it gets thrown out. But the fourth one, where most of them get thrown out, is the proposal relates to the company's ordinary business operations. You laugh, but the majority of them die on point 4. That's a law. My solution, we're not Americans, but you know those annual meetings in the United States do affect our shares and pensions as well, because we hold a lot of funds and a lot of shares in American corporations, is to change the law, right? I mean, that's within to mobilize pension funds around this and say, come on, why is everyone accepting this? And actually, in the book, you didn't read this chapter, but I forget the particular union. There are unions that are trying to fight this, but it's a hard stuff. The United Brotherhood of Carpenters, Joiners of America Pension Fund, they're trying to fight it. American Federation of Labor Congress and Industrial Organization Retirement Fund, they're trying to fight. But it's just small, right? I mean, they need to have solidarity with other shareholders. And as Jim said, although all this talk of public pension funds being so powerful, they're little players. The majority of the wealth is still held by very, very powerful capitalists. Okay? So let's get in. We can't change that right now, right? But we can, if we were in the United States, and we have a similar issue. I'm sure in Canada we have the similar barriers of what I just read in terms of shareholder proposals. We can contest that. Make it public. Run ads. Talk about this, right? I mean, this is a law that can be changed, that could open corporate democracy and open some space for some change. Reformist as it is, it could open that up. Okay, second thing, again, going back to the board diversity, American case, I don't know if you've heard of the equal access proposal. Okay, apparently in the United States, unless you have $250,000 as a shareholder, you cannot nominate anyone for the board of directors. You can't put forward a name. So there's a big stink about this in the United States, and labor-based pension funds as well as other shareholders want to fight this. It's still unresolved, but they blocked it. They said, no, this is taking corporate democracy too far. You people want to vote for the board of directors? No way. So that's nice that they have a couple of women now in the board of directors that are handpicked by management, right? These are, again, things within this depoliticizing bound of corporate governance that can be fixed, right? That's all I have to say.
Jim? Well, on the question of getting rid of pensions, that's a very provocative question, but in a way that's exactly what we're arguing. The labor movement has been very strong in the last couple of years that the public pension is the ultimate route to security in retirement, including the CPP, which has a fund, but again, the fund is secondary to the main economics of the CPP, and then the old age security system, which has no fund at all. So in a way, that's exactly what we're arguing now. Over history, workers have fought and in some cases won some pension protection direct from their employer. So, in the long run, if we succeeded in expanding the public sphere, we could get rid of those workplace funds, or workplace benefits, or use the money for something else. You know, use the money that we've extracted from the employers for something else, especially given how difficult it has been to make anything out of those workplace funds. And some workplace pension funds are actually integrated with the CPP so that they actually automatically shrink once the CPP is expanded. Not all, but some are. So, but that's kind of a long-run evolutionary change as opposed to coming out and saying, let's dump our pension fund, which I think would have trouble at the ratification. And I think pay-as-you-go public pensions make more sense than ever in the age of precarious work. I think we have to be careful how we define them. You know, the CPP is related to what you earned, but the old age security is not. So I think, again, because of the portability of the public plan, the security of the public plan, the non-financialized nature of the public plan, they're especially important given the precarious work that's happening, because precarious workers stand no chance of getting a workplace pension. That's the reality. Then this general question, and I hear the appeal, is there nothing good that can come out of thinking about how the pension funds get invested? And in a way we are in a quandary here, because if we believe what we just said, then the answer is no. On the other hand, that leaves you in a pretty difficult situation. If you're a teacher and you see the teacher's pension fund supporting companies that are doing horrible things, you know, what should we do? The former CAW's resolution to that quandary was to wash our hands of it and say, we aren't getting involved in the management of pensions. What we do is negotiate a benefit from the employer, and it's up to the employer to figure out how to pay it at the end of the day. In a way, that was, I think, a bit opportunistic. And that wasn't the main reason the CAW had that view. The main reason was the CAW didn't want to have any of the problems with pension management, failure of pension management, corruption of pension management that so many other unions have had. So now, you know, it's not that easy to be pure, especially in some cases where the joint trusteeship of the fund is mandated legally. Then we have to sort of get our hands dirty there. But I think the answer then, if you were a teacher concerned about what, say, WestJet was doing, you know, or Porter Air, there's a better example, more immediate example. Teachers has a significant share in Porter Air. We should get our asses down to the picket line and say, well, Porter Air shouldn't be able to do this, and it almost doesn't matter who owns the friggin' shares. You know, that's where we come back to reaffirming our role as citizens and workers, as opposed to marginal investors.
Catherine?
I think the only thing I want to say is just sort of more responding to this discussion. I mean, it's really nice that we can sit here in this room and go, yeah, the SRI think that's dead. But I can tell you that that's not the reality when you start standing up and actually taking your critiques public. And I mean, there's much of what I said today is in an article that I did end up getting published eventually. But it was tough. Those SRI firms were furious with me for saying the things I was saying. And I have to be careful how I put this, but they were doing their darndest to make sure that this stuff didn't get published.
Okay.
And the other thing is that it's not just the SRI firms, but there's a coterie of academics and true believers and others around them that one of the other publications in the same article sort of tries to completely counter what I'm saying in the same publication and make the point very strongly that the SRIs are really good at making companies toe the line. So we may, in the confines of this room, say, yeah, we get it and we agree, but there's still a battle to be fought out there, especially if we're starting to say that, you know, we should be able to use those funds to make a statement, and that goes to what Jim was saying. We're ways that we can get at corporations through regulations, through socially unacceptable. You know, if you do divest, at least you're making a really strong statement. You're saying this company has just crossed every line and we're divesting. So at least you can get at them that way, or I don't know about making them unprofitable, that's a little trickier, but you can at least make a social statement by divesting. So there is still something we can do. It's just not listen to the SRIs who are going to tell you that's the last thing you do. You just stick in there and play around. And with the respect to shareholder resolutions and what can and cannot go in a shareholder resolution, I mean, that battle's being fought in Canada all the time, and they changed the rules a while back, because first you couldn't put anything that had to do with social or environmental issues in there, and now you can. But to tell you the truth, that's sort of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So yeah, you can put more stuff in there. The company's still going to advise their shareholders not to vote for that, even if they don't complain that it's inadmissible, because they've stopped sort of saying that things are inadmissible because it makes them look bad. So they let most things through. They just say it's just a bad idea. It's just a bad idea. And we're already doing all the right things, and this is just irrelevant and unnecessary, and just don't do it. And now they've got the SRI standing up and agreeing with them. So it's kind of tinkering around the edges to some extent, because the question is whether you can actually get the company to do what you want it to do through a shareholder proposal. And unless the company already wants to do it, it's really hard.
But it is the kind of sober, critical analysis that I think many of us want to do to take these issues seriously. But if I could, I wouldn't mind just, pushing back a little bit, because, and especially Jim and Suzanne, I appreciate the analysis and the critique is in some ways a theoretical one, and Catherine's evidence, along with a whole lot of other, provides lots of evidence of support for the theoretical critique. But what I want to assert is that, we've inherited a complicated configuration of institutions and structures. Jim mentions, that the CAW, now Unifor, took a position, wanting to avoid the complexity of this by saying, look, we just bargain wages and pension wages, so we don't really think about how that ends up delivered. Well, those within the public sector, it's a little bit more complicated because, as you say, it was legally mandated, and in some cases, employees contribute themselves, unlike much of the private sector, to these arrangements. So it can't help but feel like that money is kind of ours. It's not just something that's put away and we get the pension later. So I can't help but want to ask back to the panel, we do need to come to terms strategically and concretely and practically with what do we do today, and this, other people are asking this, and in particular, those of us who are part of unions that have direct roles. We name trustees to sit in these complicated structures, and they are given, I think, an impossible task in many ways. There's some expectation that they're going to go off and do something socially positive or good for workers, or at least minimize the damage. I think there's lots of evidence that they are unable to do that, and you guys are giving us an analysis that helps us understand why. But okay, therefore, strategically what is, I think, a key question, because if it's really just, we're really kind of screwed and there's not much to be done, it's not very helpful. So I do think I want to get to that, and to be maybe precise about it, to just zero in on one piece that Jim addressed very briefly. There is one investment fund in the history of Canadian pension funds that I feel very attracted to, that I think is very socially responsible, or at least it demonstrates a different kind of commitment to the broader population, that avoids these complexities and was not mandated, as Suzanne says, around the idea that we must maximize shareholder return, that must be the mandate. And in fact, that is the reserve fund that was established attached to the Canada Pension Plan between 1966 and 1998, when it was then reformed and made into the privately invested fund that we know now. For that whole period, what was the Cpp Reserve Fund? It was a scheme where all of the contributions that were held and retained in a reserve were then reloaned out to the provinces for infrastructure investment. The universities, the roads, the bridges, the hospitals across the country, many of them were financed by the Cpp Reserve. I mean, you spoke about infrastructure. This has been done, not on a profit maximizing basis. And I guess I just put back to Jim, there is a part of me, that wonders a little bit, why didn't we, as the labor movement and other advocates, react a little bit more strongly to the loss of that? Because what is the CPP fund doing now? They're investing in privatized infrastructure, public-private partnerships, and privatizing utility companies in other countries. It's a devastating reconfiguration of what our own public pension fund is doing as an investor. So I guess I'd just like to put that sort of onto the table to repoliticize that and to be trying to think concretely about alternatives.
Yeah, I'm gonna continue on with Kevin's line of questioning, and then we'll have to hear from the panel in the last round. It seems to me it's also the terrain that we're in right now of neoliberalism and the tiered pension structure that we have of state, company, and private, and how to intervene on that in that context where we have almost no sustainable anti-neoliberal movements able to transform the political terrain. So how do you kind of intervene in this area where people are active? It's not so easy to determine. It's pushing Kevin's question back at you in a different way. The one thing I know is Catherine mentioned it. It has been successful. It goes back, and I have been involved with them peripherally in this anti-apartheid movement to the president around Palestine. It has been possible to say where you don't want investments in a very politically vital way, but that hardly changes pension structures. It's kind of a thing for politically campaigning around that issue and kind of using a bit of political leverage points. The SRI critique is totally convincing that everybody was raising. This is kind of an attempt to deal with politics on a completely individualistic basis, and it's completely unsuccessful. And in either in changing corporate behavior, investment flows, or and the wider kind of issues of corporate governance. It seems to me, though, that given the terrain of neoliberalism now, there might be other leverage points in and around corporate governance issues that you can politicize in different ways. But Suzanne was partly mentioning them. I think one could expect trustees and a range of others to do some things in and around unionization and union leverage issues around those as one possibility, given the terrain around. But the other, it seems to me, is really how to kind of gain control over those pools of investment in this time period. What kind of counter vehicles that could develop. None of those can occur on an individual basis. Maybe some of them can occur around through unions because of the size of the pools of funds. With the Canadian public pension funds are huge pools of capital now. I'm not sure if there's leverages that we can kind of develop in and around sectoral planning and allocation of investment funds that that are to some extent coupling a vision with some practical means to intervene. The other is obviously strategies at the level of the state, which deal with not only kind of changing, as Jim pointed out, that obviously the central demand is the expansion of the public component of the pension plans, and as both your books argue, and all of us agree on kind of squeezing down the individual RSP and pension plans. But it seems to me we've got to try and find some measures to kind of intervene at different levels, different ways at this time around these issues as well. So. That was a huge set of challenges from everybody here. Maybe I'm going to go just in the reverse direction for this, Catherine, Jim, and then Suzanne to wind up. So, Catherine?
Yeah, I wish I could come up with more good things, but
And
I guess
and I'm going to have to warn. We have to watch the time because of this.
So
each of you have
maybe I will just say
4 or 5
something about
minutes.
the Norwegian Pension Fund, because that is actually a very positive example. So, I mean, and it comes from, again, a very questionable thing, but Norway is got a huge amount of money coming in because of the offshore oil. So there's just this humongous influx, and they've been really smart about it. They realize that if they actually had that money pumped into the economy, it would devastate the economy, plus there'd be nothing for future generations. So they were smart, and they said, okay, we're going to put together a pension fund, and that we're going to invest, and then this money's going to last. Once the oil's gone, there will still be so many generations that can still benefit. And then they're only using little bits to, make a very nice economy in Norway. But then they're thinking about that a little bit more, because now they're investing this oil money, and then they start thinking, well, if we're doing this for ethical reasons, sustainability reasons, we have to also think about what we're investing it in. And so then they put together an ethical committee, and the ethical committee's task is to look at what they're invested in, and if there are things that really just don't meet the criteria, then they can divest from them. And so that provided for activists around the world a real place to go, because you could go and look at who they're invested in, like Barrick, and then you could call them up. I mean, there was one woman who was very accessible, and have a real conversation with her about it. She went to Porgera in Papua New Guinea, she checked out the riverine tailings disposal, and she said, we can't accept that. and they divested from Barrick. Now, the question was, how much of a real splash did that make? And it goes back to, you know, this other thing, this social license to operate, and whether companies are socially acceptable, and whether you can have a greater push for regulation. Once they did that, we have dined out on that for years, and people on the ground were thrilled. They were thrilled. They couldn't believe that some people in Norway had actually taken this devastation that was being wrought on them by Barrick, is still being wrought on them by Barrick, so seriously that they invested. This was hugely important for activism, and it still is. It still is. We bring it up over and over and over again. Now, there's pressure, because the person I know in the ethical committee, who, you know, I would consider a friend at this point, you know, she says there's a lot of pressure on them to go the route more of the ethical funds and the people here and in other places, and not go west, but actually get into a dialogue with the company to see where that gets you. But it is a model, and I think it's a really important model, and it's purely based on ethical grounds. So it's you know, it's something we can point to.
Jim?
Well, and I think the main lesson from that is not that Barrick Gold was hurt by the Norwegians disinvesting anyways. And that's where the SRI logic needs to be turned on its head. What was Barrick hurt by? The publicity, the campaigning, the exposing of their actions. And that's where that whole community can actually have some impact, not by just transferring ownership over a piece of paper from one investor to another. One of my very first political acts was handing out a leaflet outside of the Toronto Dominion Bank annual general meeting in Calgary, Alberta. For some reason, they were like trying to show they belonged to all Canadians. So they had their annual general meeting outside of Calgary, where I grew up. And our Chile Solidarity Committee went down there to hand out leaflets about TD's investments in Chile under Pinochet. And it wasn't socially responsible investing, it was activism. Just good old-fashioned grassroots activism, educate, mobilize. Organize was in there somewhere. And it was hilarious because we were such a scrappy bunch on the street corner in Calgary. I remember we had we splurged and had 50 leaflets, and one of them was all crumpled. So I picked it up again and tried to give it to someone else. Like secondhand, was recycling. And the guy looked at it and just kind of laughed and said, "I think you need this more than I do." Gave it back to me, I'll never forget that. Anyways, if there's leverage points, there are leverage points. I agree with you, but there's around making the arguments, I think. Maybe there's something. You mentioned the Cpp Reserve Fund. The same thing happened with the teachers. Remember, the teachers' money had to be sequestered and used to fund the provincial government's thing. And that was immensely controversial. And this is why I said it opens up a Pandora's box where you're trading off the future pension security of your members against your so-called social goal. I think pension money should be used for public infrastructure. I think there's got to be a way to do that avoids the PPP quandary or the PPP trap, where you could mobilize pension money, not in a social way per se. You could still offer a decent return, especially given where interest rates are today. I also think there's other ways that you could use pension money in the real economy to do good. One that I mentioned in that book from '99 was this Greystone Properties initiative in Vancouver, where they built nonprofit or low-cost housing. That's not socially responsible investment in a way. That's actually taking money into the real economy and doing some good with it. I haven't heard from them recently. I don't know how it all turned out. The Solidarity Fund and the case in Quebec also have a supplement to the profit maximizing motive. They are supposed to use their money to build Quebec's industrial and economic capacity. So that is a different motive, and I think there are some possibilities in that regard, but it's very different rhetoric than the SRI world. To your question on lobby governments, I say absolutely. I said, you want to stop a company from doing something, make their actions illegal or unprofitable. And to do that, we absolutely have to lobby governments.
Just to build on the points, you know, I mean, we talk about the Norwegian pension fund, or Kevin was talking about this reserve fund that existed and was probably devised not during a neoliberal era, but during a Keynesianist era, right? I mean, the Norwegians are so wonderful with their pension fund because they have secure jobs, because they have a strong welfare state. Let's not forget this. If they were strapped like us, they wouldn't be doing this shit, okay? Sorry. And sorry, but the divestment campaign, I wrote on the Sudan divestment campaign, nothing has happened. This is like the biggest divestment in the U.S. after the ANC, after South Africa, and nothing has happened. I mean, CalPERS is still investing in PetroChina. Harvard is still investing in PetroChina, and they go through their institutional, investors, and they blame just the way the CAW divorced itself from the management of pensions, that same excuse, right? The point is, as been mentioned here, we've got to move away from investor citizenship and go back to activism, right? And also just this fundamental aspect of fighting neoliberal-led capitalism, right? That has to be there, right? I mean, you think of let's be like Norway, and then we can act like the Norwegian.
All right.
With the recent change of government in Norway, and the limits of the last, still more hopeful note than a pessimistic note to end on. I'd like to thank Catherine, Jim, and Anastasia.